Good evening. Good evening. My name is Andrew Jorgensen, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first installment of Opera Theater of St. Louis's 2021 Carol L. Kimball Spotlight on Opera series. For so many of us at Opera Theater of St. Louis, Spotlight on Opera is a wonderful tradition that truly marks the beginning of the festival season. And so after an incredibly challenging year and a canceled season, I am so delighted to have you join us for this series as we return to live performances and explore the productions of our first ever outdoor festival season. Tonight, we kick off our series with a spotlight on Puccini's classic comedy, Gianni. I am joined tonight by some of the wonderful artists and creative team members involved in this production. Before we dive in, I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you to the Opera Theater Board of Directors led by our wonderful chairman, Noemi Neidorf. The leadership and generosity of the entire board has been a driving force for the company as we have adapted and innovated across this last year. The board encouraged us to get out of the box, literally, and that has led Opera Theater outside the theater to a safe and artistically fulfilling outdoor season, which will have our fabulous artists performing live once again. Many of our Spotlight regulars may be missing the in-person post-event receptions hosted by members of the Opera Theater Guild. I know I'm certainly missing those cream puffs. And while we aren't able to gather in that way right now, I do want to say a huge thank you as well to all of the volunteers of the Opera Theater Guild who have so artfully adapted the many ways they support the work of OTSL to respond to this year's needs. I'm also grateful to Opera Theater's many donors who have made possible this Spotlight on Opera series and our production of Gianni. The Spotlight on Opera series is made possible with gifts celebrating the life of Carol L. Kimball, a member of the Opera Theater family who is a generous friend and beloved volunteer. Gianni is made possible with leadership gifts from the Burgess Family Foundation and Sally S. Levy and family. For those of us who have been with us for Spotlight in past years, you know that the libretti, which are so carefully put together by Opera Theater's volunteers, are typically sold prior to the event. Though you will not be able to buy a hard copy of a libretto this year, you can still purchase digital access through the Opera Theater Boutique for just $5. You can get to the boutique's online storefront through the Opera Theater website or the brand new Opera Theater of St. Louis Festival app, which you can download to your favorite device this evening. We hope you enjoy this evening of conversation and performances by our Gerdine Young Artists. We will have time at the end for your questions, so please post early and often in the chat, and we'll record those questions and come back to them later. I'm now delighted to introduce our first panelist. He is a sought-after choreographer and director for opera and theater. He has collaborated with companies such as San Francisco Opera, Opera Montreal, the New York City Opera, the Metropolitan Opera, and many more. He made his Opera Theater of St. Louis debut as the choreographer for Nixon in China in 2004, and since then has returned for many productions as a choreographer and also stage director, including Salome, The Daughter of the Regiment, Ariadne on Naxos, The Pirates of Penzance, and many more. His dance company has presented 30 premieres and toured to over 100 venues in the US and around the world. He is currently an arts professor and chair of the Department of Dance at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, and he is a beloved friend and wonderful collaborator at Opera Theater. It is my pleasure to welcome our stage director for Gianni, Sean Curran. Sean, good evening.
Good evening. I love usually being in the audience for Spotlight on the Opera, so it's a real honor to be on the panel.
We're so glad that you are with us, and there's so much I want to ask you about. But first, I want to welcome and introduce our second panelist, your collaborator, the conductor of this production. He is an internationally acclaimed conductor whose credits include being the music director laureate of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and conductor laureate of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, though he has had many other music director and guest conductor posts during his career. He conducts all over the world and is active as a composer, author, and educator. He is a 6-time Grammy Award winner. He is also a recipient of the prestigious National Medal of the Arts and holds the rank of Chevalier in the French Legion of Honor. He made his debut with Opera Theater of St. Louis as conductor for Ariadne on Naxos in 1979, and he returned in 1985 to conduct The Barber of Seville. We are thrilled to welcome him back to Opera Theater of St. Louis after too long an absence. Welcome to our Gianni Schicchi conductor, Leonard Slatkin.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's a thrill to be back with Opera Theater and to work with this outstanding cast and our fabulous director, Sean. We're having a ball.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it, and thank you both for joining us after what I know has been a busy day of rehearsals. I have so many questions to ask. Sean, I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit about your concept for this production. Where and how are you staging it? What are some exciting things the audience can expect? And does being outside have an impact in that conception of the production?
Well, I'll answer the end of your question first. Being outside is a wonderful challenge, and it came up today in rehearsal. As a young dancer, I danced outside a lot. Lincoln Center out of doors, Central Park Summer Stage, Celebrate Brooklyn. These are all outdoor festivals in New York City where the companies I worked with would perform. And there's always the fear that because you're competing with that sky, that everything can evaporate, right? Luckily, we have this proscenium frame that I'm going to do a good job of composing interesting pictures there, and that won't happen. And we're talking a lot about physical projection out to an audience that's in front of you. It's unusual. It's not stage right and left like we usually have. So the outside presents challenges. In terms of the concept, because of the strange days and difficult times we're in, the research I did was very different than normal, what I would do. I usually listen to the opera 100 times. I still go to the Jerome Robbins Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center. I do a lot of watching. I did a lot of reading this time. And with my fabulous collaborators, Alan Moyer and James Schutte, we originally thought maybe the late 20s in the summer. And then we made a minor adjustment and pushed it into the early 1930s. Of course, it's from Dante's Inferno. It's meant to be in, I think, 1299. I think that would be the kiss of death for a modern production. So it's early 1930s. It has to be in Florence. You can't set this in Cuba or in I don't know, in Southeast Asia. It's not going to fly. There's too many love letters to Florence in it. So yeah, it's a beautiful early 1930s Firenze, and this strange dysfunctional family inhabiting that world.
It's so exciting to have this work back on our stage, which we haven't had, incidentally, since 1979. It's been more than 40 years since we've had this work back on our stage. Leonard, I want to ask you about this work and about Puccini's style. Puccini gave us some of the most famous tunes in opera, some of the most popular operas in the canon: Bohème, Tosca, Madame Butterfly. What makes his music so timeless? And is Gianni Schicchi a masterpiece right up there with those more famous titles? How should we think about this work that hasn't been on our stage in so long?
Originally, Puccini thought of this as the third of a trilogy of operas with Il Tabarro and Suor Angelica. And he actually insisted at one point that it be played as the third of the three and not be separated. But after the premiere, which the first two operas were received politely, it was very clear that Gianni Schicchi stood out from the others. So why is that? First of all, it's very different. It's not like the other Puccini operas, which are driven primarily by the individual characters. This is a true ensemble opera. Everybody has a lot to do. There are moments where you could make a parallel that it's closer to Verdi's Falstaff than any of other operas of Puccini. And because of the intricacy of all the vocal lines and all the things they have to do, this puts it in a very separate category from anything else he wrote. Also remember, it's 1917. We're coming to the end of World War I. The idea of entertainment is beginning to come back to the public, much as it is now at the end of the pandemic. And this piece only has one aria that we all know and love, of course. And it's set up so beautifully because we hear the Omio Babbinocado and the low strings and the trombone, and finally, Lauretta gets it. But there are other tunes that will recur, and it becomes a leitmotif, very much like a Wagner opera or by other Puccinis. We begin to identify certain music with certain characters and situations. In the course of about 55 minutes, Puccini creates an ideal masterpiece here. There's nothing that's out of place, nothing is superfluous, and the idea when it's over that you've had a complete meal, even though it was only intended as the dessert originally, is very satisfying for everybody.
And tell us just a bit more about the elements of Puccini's style. What should we be listening for that either ties this to his other works, or maybe that makes this distinctive from some of those other works?
Again, we have this idea that this is the ensemble piece. Mm-hmm. And even though it's 1917, which means that Stravinsky and Schoenberg have been on the scene for a while. We've had the Rite of Spring. It's been there for already 6 years. Schoenberg has begun to develop his 12-tone system. This has no interest to Puccini whatsoever. We can hear a fleeting reference to Wagner, a few other composers, but he's in his very own world. It's slightly expanded, and it's the color of the sonorities and the color of the way the voices are used that make it so unique. We're, of course, listening for the tunes, but in this one, we're more driven, in my opinion, by who these people are. The rather avaricious family who are out for themselves, the lovers, or soon-to-be lovers, and Gianni Schicchi, who's kind of out for himself, but out for a bit of revenge against the bourgeoisie. So we're listening, looking, and learning about these characters in a very short space of time. I don't think it presents any problems for the listener. You might listen for the opening music, which is kind of people rushing about, and then it slows down to an almost funereal pace for a surprisingly long time. And this indicates the demise of the character who's never had a word to sing in the whole opera. But as Sean and everybody have done, we brought this character into the Weekend at Bernie's point of view. He doesn't stay in the bed all the time. It's a visual delight. This is a real opera. You know, an opera like Turandot you can do in concert and it comes off perfectly fine. When you think about it, it's a relatively static affair. But this one, no. Something is happening all the time. And that's Sean's big job in this, because there is no dead air.
So that's a perfect transition. Sean, Leonard mentioned, you know, there's no dead air. There's so much happening. And this is an ensemble cast where there's not big moments of aria where everything stops. How do you think about tackling that on stage? And how does your dance background help you create all of that motion and all of those visual pictures that help to bring this very complicated ensemble story to life?
Yeah, I said on day one that for me, the family, the ensemble, is like an extra character in the opera. You know, not listed in the program, but that ensemble, that groupthink, is very important to the piece. And you know, I come at everything as choreographer / director. It's composition. It's about space. I worry at times the singers and my brilliant assistant, James Blaschko, get frustrated at me because I'm music driven. You know, I deal in abstract visual gesture language. So it's the music that motivates me, and I don't pay enough attention to the text at times. But luckily, I have people like Leonard and James who keep me on track. But I do think very spatially. And, you know, this idea of the character in the bed, Weekend at Bernie's, there's a dead character. There's also The Trouble with Harry. I thought about that movie. I wanted the dark part of the dark comedy to center around this bed. And I've used kind of an old showbiz or theatrical trope, this idea of a family portrait. We never actually take a picture of the family, but the family is around the bed. I've done a lot of work at Bergen Opera in Norway. I've gone to the Munch Museum many times. Edvard Munch made many paintings of deathbed scenes. So this idea of the deathbed is very important to me. And also in ancient Irish culture, there were horror stories. I remember being a kid with Irish parents, the dead body on the kitchen table surrounded by food, and you eat the food and you take the sins. So there's a darkness within all of this that I want people to know. And I'm doing sort of my spatial tricks where we do an inversion, where you see the picture one way and then we invert it the other way. I'm very interested with the composition, points in space where the bodies are, and this visual brand of storytelling that's not always just about words, but about how people move to music and how they behave. It's all about the behavior, and I have great collaborators in the cast. They're all great physical comedians and great collaborators.
So I have to dig into that last bit, just one bit more, and ask you and Leonard both a question about comedy. There aren't that many great comedies in opera. Tell us a little bit about the challenges or opportunities in bringing comedy to the operatic stage. A quick thought, Sean and Leonard both, please.
Well, I'll go first, I guess. You know, this is one of the few times where I showed up with it all mapped out in my head, and this will be that joke, and we'll get a laugh here and everything. And I had to throw it all out the window because you just can't plan for that stuff. It has to be spontaneous. It has to be rigorously honest because, of course, comedy is the watcher watching, recognizing either the ridiculousness in the situation or identifying with it. Oh, that happened to me, and you know, it's very funny. So it's true. You know, it's a cliche now. Tragedy is easy, comedy is hard. But Puccini has punctuated the music in a way where he tells us where the possibility for a joke or a gag is, and we're finding them. The fine line I'm trying to tread is we don't want to be too slapstick and we don't want to be too cartoony, but we do want to get laughs. And Andrew, I have to say, you poked your head into a rehearsal day 2 and you laughed out loud. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, we got our first laugh. Thank you, Andrea. The vote of confidence that laugh gave me, I'll be grateful to you forever.
It may be that I'm an easy audience, but I thought it was already on its feet and funny. Leonard, add to that. You were nodding when Sean mentioned, you know, that fine line between slapstick and sort of a different kind of comedy. Conducting comedy, what's that about?
A long time ago here in St. Louis, I had I don't even know what word, pleasure, honor, whatever, of doing a concert with the great comedian Jack Benny. And that may not be a familiar name to some of you watching, but still, he was a genius. Prior to the rehearsal with the orchestra, he called 5 of us to his hotel room at 5 in the afternoon to rehearse the shtick that would occur during the course of his presentation. We were there for 6 hours, and he drilled us on timing about how everything has to be in a certain way in order for it to be funny. He would talk about how a split second can make the difference between that line of slapstick and satire. I'll never forget it. And I try to think about that when I'm doing little adjustments. I try to make them subtle enough that maybe not everybody will get it. For example, there's a moment sort of near the end when Schicchi is taking over for Buoso in the deathbed, and he's reciting his will, and the notary's taking this down, and he speaks in Latin. It's one of the few times we stay with what's written there. The Latin just sounds more official and, you know, like this. So I decided I'm going to play this musically without the strings using vibrato, which would be very much in use of Puccini's time, but would be more common in the time when the opera is set. So it's a very subtle thing, and it's different, and it's not meant to evoke a huge laugh, but it's meant to go, well, that's different, just a little bit. And that's the difference in how I think we're all approaching this, to find those few moments of broad laughs where we are clearly going to get it, but it's built in, there's timing that allows us for the laugh, we have to have that, but also moments when it just goes by and maybe you go, wow, I never noticed that before. And that's one of the beauties of this piece. It's very clear that Puccini is giving his singers and the musicians and perhaps the conductor some leeway to have some fun.
Oh, well, I think that's the word that we all need right now, which is the fun of returning to performance. Thank you both for these insights. I have more questions and we'll come back to you both. But for Spotlight on Opera regulars, you know that one of the highlights of our time together is to hear great excerpts from these productions sung by members of the Gerdine Young Artists program. And there's no exception this evening, despite the format. It is my pleasure now to hear some of those timeless Puccini melodies, to introduce Lindsay Reynolds singing Lauretta's Arya, the very, very famous Omio Babbinocado, accompanied by Damian Francoeur-Krizik. Let's hear. Bravo, Lindsay and Damian. Thank you so much for sharing that. What a great hint of what is to come, and what a great visual of the wonderful safety protocols we are exercising here at Opera Theater as we prepare for the season. A reminder, please, if you're watching at home, to put questions into the chat for any of our panelists. But let's keep going, and I'll introduce our final panelist, who is currently a second-year studio artist at the Houston Grand Opera. In 2019, she was a Gerdine Young Artist with opera theater and sang the role of Barbarina in that beautiful Marriage of Figaro production. In addition to her growing career as a classically trained soprano, she is also committed to integrating community engagement and activism with her musical platform. Singing the role of Lauretta in our production of Gianni Schicchi, please welcome the fantastic soprano, Elena Villolon.
Hello.
Good evening. Welcome back to St. Louis. How are you?
I'm so well and so happy to be back.
So how is it? You're a week into rehearsals. Tell us about how this rehearsal process, what's it looked like so far? Tell us about protocols. Tell us about singing in this adapted environment. What's it like to be back to preparing for live in-person performances?
Well, I mean, it's been a lot. I was at Houston Grand Opera this past year, and we've been doing a lot of the COVID protocols there as well. So in a way, it was nice to sort of step into the same thing here. But I know that everyone that came to this process in the room, whether they had been doing things with protocols or had not, feel so relaxed and at ease by the protocols that OTSL has put into place, which really allows us to make the art we want to make. And, you know, the process has been great. It's a fast-paced opera. The, you know, our director, maestro, everyone, the ensemble, the cast, you know, the cast as an ensemble, are just so incredible. It's always nice to be in a room where everyone is great at what they do and, you know, no divas, but it's especially nice coming out of COVID to work in a cast where everyone is fantastic and just enjoying ourselves. And as Sean was talking about, sort of finding comedic moments as the opera is going on has been a joy as well. So we've all just had a blast the whole time.
I'm glad to hear it. And I want to come back to those comedic moments in a second. But first, I have to ask, we saw that mask that Damien was wearing in the video recording. We're making you rehearse in those kinds of N95 masks. What's it like to sing in a mask like that? How does it feel? How does it change your singing?
You know, well, it does. It does significantly. It's funny because every singer has a different opinion about different masks. It's a very personal thing, which mask we like. At OTSL, we're all wearing the same mask, which are these N95 masks, but different companies have had different protocols about, you know, just cloth masks you can wear or the singer's mask, which is sort of a constructed mask in front of the face that allows for a little bit of space so we can take deep breaths and the cloth doesn't come into our face and, you know, sing our consonants and it's not obstructed by the mask. I think everyone dislikes the masks in general, but are so genuinely happy to be singing with people and with piano, that it's just sort of something we have to do in this time. My personal taste, I actually like the N95 masks. They're sort of a great balance between the cloth masks and the singer's mask. A little bit of space in the front of the face, but not too structured to really inhibit singing in the rehearsals.
That makes sense. I'm wondering if maybe it's a bit like marathon runners who train at high altitudes. When they come back down to sea level, they're ready for sprinting distance. But
I hope so.
Well, you know, come back to comedy. You mentioned comedy. Leonard and Sean were talking about comedy. Of course, we've seen your comedic chops at Opera Theater already. You made Barbarina spectacularly funny in 2019. What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest things that you focus on as an artist when you're preparing for a comedic role versus a dramatic role?
Sure. I think well, in general, comedies are harder to play than tragedies. And probably a very important part of that equation and why that does exist, especially in an opera like Gianni Schicchi, is that it's such an ensemble opera. Everybody has to be good, and that's what makes it incredible. That's what makes it a masterpiece. Even more so is the fact that, you know, the comedy just bounces off. It's fast paced. You know, it's only an hour long as well. So Puccini really fit a lot in there because it's an hour long. I think a lot of it does happen in the rehearsal room, like Sean was saying, our director, that, you know, you can come with a lot of these ideas, but once you start working together with your castmates, especially, you realize they have different ideas, and you meld the personalities that come and bring different ideas, and you know, you never know what you're going to create together. I think that's the beauty of it. That you are creating in the moment, in the rehearsal rooms, these funny moments that we hope everyone else has a laugh from.
I know that we will. Of course, this is an ensemble cast, but I think arguably Lauretta is the one who gets the song of the night. Omio Babbinocado is maybe the most famous tune in all of opera. You might disagree. We could maybe throw a couple others out there, but it's certainly up there. Who did you listen to? Whose recording inspires you? It's a very short aria, but it's so beautiful. Is it a challenge? Is it daunting? Is it exciting to get to take on one of these arias, which is just so seminal to the entire canon and so central in our field?
Yeah, you know, I think because it's such a famous aria that I don't have a favorite. I think there's a few factors. I think it's such a famous aria. Everyone does it. Any soprano, you know, it's a great recital, concert ender. You know, everyone loves it. And often when people do it, it's in that setting as well. You know, Gianni Schicchi is not done as much as the aria is done. And, you know, it's funny because it's always funny to me when people absolutely adore the aria, as they should, for its beauty of, you know, its lyricism and everything, soaring melodies. But the aria itself is a little bit of a trick that Lauretta, my character, is playing. There's two parts to the aria, sort of, you know, primarily very genuine and unfeigned plea to her father. And the second part is she's a little bit of a scammer. You know, there's a little bit of cunning behind it because she wants to soften her father's heart to get what she wants. And so she manipulates him thus. And, you know, so I think any soprano worth their salt wants to do it. I mean, it's beautiful. There's stuff behind it. It's integral to the plot. You know, I think if you even compare some other Puccini operas, sometimes he'll stop the opera for an aria for the soprano. And it's nice to do something that is beautiful and also sort of moves things forward. And I have to give a shout out to Lindsay, who just sang it. We heard earlier. She did it so beautifully. And it was wonderful to hear. Absolutely.
And what a good colleague you are, and how lucky we are to have you and Lindsay singing that with us right now.
So much resonance and sound. She was blowing out the mic at the top. I love to hear it. That's how you know it's good.
Absolutely. I only wish we could have it in the fantastic acoustic at the Ethical Society,
right.
A space that we all are missing this year. Elena, there are more questions I want to ask, but I'd love to take a moment and hear a little bit more music first. And so I'm going to introduce Gerdine Young Artist Ryan Johnson, who will be singing a wonderful aria, Avete torto, Firenze è come un albero fiorito. You are mistaken in English. Our Florence is a proud and ancient city. Let's hear that wonderful aria.
You are mistaken. He's clever and cunning. knows all the tricks of the trade and a few of his own. He's nobody's fool, sly as a vixen, sharp as a needle. And should anyone have a special problem, then Johnny Schicchi will find the answer. When his eyes are illumined like a cat's in a gloomy corner, and his face gets a crooked little smile, then you know that he is ready for a prank. Where did he come from? Why bother? Does it matter? Why must your silly pride ruin our chances? Our Florence is a proud and ancient city. Her influence and beauty are unequaled, marshalling all her vigor and authority, showing the world her power and her splendor. Though the country has many lovely cities, greatest in all the world today is Florence. Here, meandering gently through the country, wanders the mightiest of rivers, softly calling the waters that surround her to journey onward together to the ocean. In this fashion, our culture has always flourished, with every manner of nobleman and merchant. Here we have gathered men of art and science, working together to create our Florence. Arnolfo Giotto, architect and painter, the Medici so fearless and courageous. These were the men who helped to build our city. Long live their true successor, Gianni Schicchi!
Thank you, Ryan and Damien. That was thrilling. What a pleasure to hear such beautiful music. Thank you so much. Leonard, I have to ask, you have conducted the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra many, 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 many times, but maybe never before under socially distanced conditions. Tell us a bit about coming home to your hometown orchestra and about the challenges and particulars of what this moment will be outside and conducting the orchestra in this way.
This will be about the 6th week where I've done performances and rehearsals. I did a couple of weeks in Rhode Island, a week with my former orchestra in Detroit, and then a week here with the symphony about 10 days ago. So it's not easy. Conducting with a mask on, both for rehearsals and for performance, is sort of like asking the flute player to play with only 3 fingers. Because when you cover up this part, you lose an entire portion of the communication. I'm not talking verbal. We all think conductors can express with their eyes, and they can, but you need the whole face. And you also need to take breaths. And the people playing need to see the breaths of the conductor. So if I give an upbeat, I'm breathing, as I will with the singers. But if this is covered, you don't see that. and it takes something away. So that becomes a whole new direction, whole new way of having to deal with the craft of what I do. Playing separated also presents a lot of challenges. The players like to think of themselves as being an ensemble. That means together, but here we are apart. 6 feet apart for the strings, 10 feet apart for the winds. Now, the winds obviously can't play with masks on, although there have been some clever people who've drilled little holes in their mask. It looks very, silly, but it works. But mostly, it's difficult to hear. The players being separated from each other don't have the ability to react the same way. The sound comes a touch later, and you rely more on instinct, upon your musicality to be able to do these things. We, of course, have not had the chance yet to work with our singers. So in this set of rehearsals we've had so far, we have focused mostly on just getting the notes where they need to be. As the stagings have gone on, I've been able to say, okay, this is going to happen here. There's going to be a 4-second or so silence here. So they have a rough idea of what's going to happen. And then next Saturday, I think, when we get together for the Sitzprobe, which is the first coming together of everybody, the orchestra will have a rough idea of what to do. I will have a much better idea because by then we'll have finished a complete staging of the whole opera. And I think by the time we have our outdoor rehearsals, weather and elements permitting, we should be just fine. And I'm very excited about it. It's a different kind of challenge, but one that sort of adds a different dimension to performance and rehearsal skills.
It's such an interesting adaptation. I think that certainly necessity has been the mother of invention here as we find new ways. Sean, I wonder if you can build on that. What are the challenges, the particulars about leading a rehearsal process and leading a staging with N95s, with these protocols? Tell us a bit about the protocols that are happening and maybe just a little bit more about the challenges in your corner that bringing this production to life under these circumstances.
Yes, I just spent a year at NYU with my dance majors at Tisch, wearing masks in class and physically distancing, 10 feet at the bar, 12 feet when they're in the center, only 8 in a class, 1 teacher, 1 musician. And I have to say, and I'm not saying this just because I'm at Opera Theater of St. Louis, I think singing is actually a lot more difficult than dancing in masks. Anecdotally, I can tell you today we were staging the brilliant Levi Hernandez, who plays Gianni Schicchi, in the bed, where James Schuette's given him a stocking cap and he can kind of cover his face, and he has a hanky, but he had a mask on. And I actually thought, he's doing a great job of hiding. And then I realized, oh, it's because he also has an N95 mask on. So we had a little bit of a laugh at that. There was another point where I said, oh, it would be great if everyone played the shock of this moment and you sort of dropped your jaw, like open your mouth, and everyone looked at each other and said, we already are doing that, Sean. But of course, I can't tell. I think everybody, as Leonard was saying, are using their eyes. I call it eye acting. You can be very expressive. And there's a real heightened awareness, I think, of peripheral awareness and what I would call backspace, that expression, the eyes in the back of your head, because this is all cut off. And the singers have to breathe, and they have to breathe with the conductor and all this stuff. So it's very challenging. The other thing I'll say is that we're being very careful about props. We're hearing that, picking up, you don't have to wipe your groceries down when you get them home with a Clorox wash. But, Dr. Spinoculo came in the other day, and he has a great old-fashioned doctor bag, but he has to go and get it himself. If it were a few years ago, the props person would come and bring it to him. So we're being very careful, erring on the side of caution. But I can tell you, I think I'm speaking on behalf of the cast, we cannot wait to be outside to take the masks off. And it's almost like we'll be adding this later. It's another problem with the text. Everyone's singing beautifully, but with the mask, it's hard to know what they're singing. So, as a teacher, I say limitations foster creativity. I have to heed my own advice and understand that we're living with this mask for a couple of weeks. I need to be creative, use my imagination, and there'll be a big reveal when those masks comes off. Once we're outside, we're not taking them off till we go outside, and there'll be a whole new thing to sort of enjoy and deal with and direct.
Absolutely, and that's so helpful to understand. I'm going to begin to incorporate some of the questions from the chat because we have some really fabulous audience questions that are coming in. Sean, I'm going to stay with you just for a moment. With an ensemble piece like this and with all of the different elements that we're putting together, is there a possibility for too much energy or for too much to be going on stage? Can there be an overwhelming quality where we sort of miss the mark? Or is that not a possibility?
Oh, it's a possibility. And in fact, on day 2 or 3, I did something you're not supposed to do. I quoted some of my bad press. As a young choreographer, I got a review in the New York Times about a dance I made, and it said something like, Sean Curran's work collapses under its own weight, right? So I learned early on about editing. Of course, every great artist knows about editing. And the great visual artist Robert Longo, who's famous for his series Men in the Cities, where he draws very big drawings taken from photographs and goes in and erases. He said to me once, the secret to a good picture is not what you do with a pencil, but what you do with the eraser, right? I am a bit of a maximalist. It's about stripping it away. And, the director's job, first and foremost, is to tell the story vividly and clearly, but also in a more technical, dry notion is I need to make sure the audience is looking where I need them to look to get the story. So we'll finish staging tomorrow. We threw it up nice and fast. There's great bones in this piece, but it's almost, I gave them the image the other day that, if you go to the movies, remember when we went to the movies? Well, you can go back now. And sometimes you're at the movies and the film goes out of focus and there's some, obnoxious but brave guy in the third row who says, focus the film. As a director, I need to focus the film. I loved what Elena just said about the comedy. No two performances are alike. That's the virtuosity of the performers. If you want it the same way every time you make a movie. So there's a wonderful kind of elasticity in terms of how they sing it, how they play the comedy. But it is all about the editing and really fine-tuning, focusing the picture for the watchers watching.
That's thank you. I love that notion of focusing and editing to keep only what we absolutely need in that environment. Leonard, I want to pivot and ask a question from the audience and add my own question to it. Someone's asked about the difference between conducting symphony and conducting opera. Are they the same? Are they different? And I wonder, to add my own sort of nuance to that question, building on what Sean just said, what is the additional layer when you're also adding this element of comedy and all of the wonderful nuance that you were talking about a little while ago?
Conducting until about the middle of the 20th century saw the conductors coming from the opera pit. Furtwängler, Toscanini, all these people, they ventured to symphony work later. From the mid-20th century on, it began to shift. So my generation comes from a more symphonic background. And the reason for that is that the repertoire of orchestras dramatically pushed the envelope in the 20th century, whereas most operas really didn't. Most operas stayed within the confines of what their predecessors had before. And Schicchi is a very good example. There's very much a feeling it's an opera of the 19th century, just with some 20th century costume and design over it. Whether it's Britten or even Adams, whatever, there's a certain way that opera goes. Orchestral work, different. The difference for me is simple. It's the addition of a story. Most of what I am concerned with when I'm working with orchestras is abstract. I have to inject a story onto it and convey that to the orchestra. Here, with operas, I have to convey the idea of what the music has for the story that already exists. Abstract versus realistic, as it were. For the audience, they see an opera, they see the director's vision, hear what the musicians have to say. They come to a symphonic performance, and it's really more about trying to get 1,500 people to have 1,500 different reactions. I had to add one thing to this. Jean, my conducting teacher, Jean Morel, had a great line. I asked him, I had to conduct a ballet one year at Juilliard, with Martha Graham, no less. And I asked my teacher, what is the difference between conducting opera and ballet? And he said, well, it is very simple. When the dancers go to the top, they have to come down. High notes, gravity.
Well, we'll see about high notes in this production. And
there's not too many of there in this opera. There's really not the expressive hang on to the note as long as you can and see how long you can wait. You don't want that in this opera. It's not about that. It's about conveying the totality, and maybe that's the similarity between all music. The idea is get from the beginning to the end, have it make sense as a long line. We've all told a story in some way. And as far as comedy goes, go for the short laughs, go for the cheap ones when you want, but make sure it doesn't interrupt the flow of the story.
Elena, that sounds like a challenge to me for some sustained high notes somewhere. The maestro will be giving me reprimanding me later for suggesting that. I have to ask because it's now come up in a couple of ways here. A question that's come up here in the audience chat, but also that we talk about all the time at opera theater, which is diction, singing in English, and the challenges and opportunities of singing in English for an English-speaking audience. I want to start with the challenges of diction in masks, the challenges of good diction outside, and the challenges of thinking about this very well-known text to this very word-heavy opera, because there's a lot of story that goes on. And I'd love to hear from all of you about this, because it intersects in so many ways. Elena, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, it's almost impossible to be heard and understood sometimes. When you're singing, you have the sound coming out, and sometimes that's the only thing you can hear out of the masks. So oftentimes, Sean will ask us in rehearsals to speak the text, which does happen, outside of COVID too. But it is hard to understand even what my my colleagues are singing. When we're wearing these masks. The chance to sing it in English, though, I think makes it immediately more accessible to audience members. I think once the masks come off, it will be much easier. And that's something I have always admired and continue to do so about OTSL, is that immediacy of being able to understand and relate is something that is lost, I think, most of the time in opera. With the languages that we don't understand as Americans and having to go up and down with the subtitles on the stage. I hope that will sort of be retained in the outdoor theater. I think that we will be mic'd, though, and that will help somewhat. To what extent, I have no idea. I'm the one on stage and I can't hear what they're doing out there. But yeah, certainly maybe I'll be able to take a break and just turn them to crank it up.
Leonard, please.
This is going to sound horrible to some of you, but imagine that there are 2 or more of you in a room and you're all speaking at the same time. You can't tell what any particular individual sang for the whole length of it. And it is exactly the same thing in opera. The minute two or more people start singing, you lose somewhere. You know, whether it's the great quartet and Rigoletto, it doesn't matter. We are not about the words anymore when you have two or more people. You can't do that. What we've tried to do so far is make some discrete, maybe sometimes not so discrete, alterations to the text to make it a little clearer for the audience. So sometimes we found that an Italian word has more of an effect than the English. So when it starts and people say, poor old Buoso, first of all, we don't like to use the word old anymore. And we thought everybody will get povero Buoso. So we keep that. And how much better is Firenze than Florence? So it's Firenze. And along the way, we're making these little changes, little adjustments. Another thing, because we're setting it in the 1930s, the currency of the realm is no longer the florin. We have to deal with having major calculations about how much lira is worth. So these are the little changes we get to do and have a lot of fun with.
I love that, and thank you for pointing that out, Sean. I want to pass it to you, but I want to throw in a question from my friend Steve Skranka, which I think keeps this conversation going, but with a finer point on it. How much of the humor in this opera is based on sight and singer gestures and facial expressions? How much is based on that, and how much is just based on the words, the text, and what's already baked in from what Puccini gave us?
Wow, it's a great question because it's an opera. You're getting information this way into your eyeballs and this way peripherally into your ears. And as an audience member, you know, I like to say you have to metaphorically, metaphysically buy a ticket. In other words, do the work, you know, lean forward, as it were, and take it all in. In some of the research I did, it was interesting to me that Puccini in his genius was kind of foreshadowing or predicting the Italian cinema of the 50s and 60s. Yeah. Fellini, for example, and even like an Italian composer like Nino Rota, who was a great composer in his own right, but wrote all those brilliant film scores to support the comedy or the drama or the tragedy. So, you know, hearkening back a little bit to the previous question, connecting it to this, when I'm working with young dancers, I remind them that the music is the motor for the dancing and the breath is the fuel for that motor. But in this case, in the opera, I feel like Leonard makes it very clear that the rhythmic, the integrity of the composition, the rhythmic integrity is what I'm saying, is going to only support the comedy of how Mr. Puccini decided to write the music. So that's why Firenze scans better than Florence, or poor Buoso, povero Buoso. So it's very important because as an audience member, you need to be multitasking. The other thing I think I'll say about the comedy is that Puccini also predicts or foreshadows a modern situation comedy on TV. Yeah. It's a ridiculous situation. It probably would never really happen or play out this way. But of course, there's some truth in it. You know, the truth hurts. And these are greedy people, and they're going to go against this poor old guy's wishes, who wants to give all his money to the monastery, but they don't want that. They want to get it themselves. So again, we identify with the greed and the neediness. The stakes are high. If the money doesn't go to the family, the young lovers don't get to be lovers, and this family that thinks they're rich but aren't really will wind up poor. So if you're coming, be ready to do some multitasking, because that's where part of Puccini's genius, I think, lies, and that he's doing so much at once, and we have to take it all in and quickly understand.
I love it. We have just a couple of minutes left together this evening. Time flies when I have the pleasure of being with such incredible colleagues. I want to ask one more question, and I want each of you to answer it quickly. As we are coming back to live performances, we have the chance to connect again with our audiences. And I wonder if each of you could share a memory, that aha moment that first connected you or ignited in you a passion for this extraordinary art form. Leonard, I wonder if you would share with us first.
Well, I had the good fortune of growing up in an extremely musical family. So listening to my parents, one half of the famous Hollywood String Quartet, rehearsing the great works of Beethoven, Schubert, Schoenberg, Villalobos, Hindemith, that, of course, was the first thing. But the very first concert that made a big impression on me, this really dates me, and I'll tell you right now, I'm 76. In 1952, the NBC Symphony Orchestra came to Los Angeles, played in Pasadena, and the 8-year-old Leonard Slatkin heard a live performance of Arturo Toscanini.
Wow. That is extraordinary.
Go ahead, guys, top that one.
It's no wonder you have a life in music. Sean, what was the aha moment for you?
Well, Leonard, I can't top Toscanini. I really can't top Martha Graham. We have to have a conversation about that.
We should, yes.
But I love this question, and I have kind of a precious answer. You know, a big part of my story is I'm the son of Irish immigrants, Irish Catholic immigrants. And when I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, the musical Jesus Christ Superstar came out. And I don't know how I knew to ask for the record for Christmas, but I got the record for Christmas. And then in my hometown of Boston, a national tour came through. And in the crucifixion scene in Jesus Christ Superstar, the rock opera, rock musical, my parents had no idea what I was asking them to take me to. I think they thought it was more like a Bible pageant or something. But Jesus is on this triangular, as I remember it, bronze kind of a thing, and is lifted up. And in this particular touring production, there was a mirror ball, like we would know from a disco, where you shine lights on it. And it was the most magical moment that my 4th grader brain could take in. And I thought, how do they do that? It was just, I remember it vividly. And I think because I was a young Catholic kid in parochial school and I loved Jesus, you know, I've come through fire. It's not like that anymore. But it was just one of those coup de théâtre moments where something as simple as a mirror ball that I didn't understand, the simple technology of it, took my breath away and somehow planted a seed and made me know that I wanted to be involved in whoever figured out how to do that. So it's a precious moment in my life as a young theater goer.
Know that you have given many of us similar moments in your work at Opera Theater and elsewhere. Elena, we're going to give you the last word. We have Toscanini, we have Mirables. What was the aha moment that inspired you to this pursuit?
Well, it's funny because I actually did see an opera when I was like 6 years old, and it was The Magic Flute. Which is ironic because I now sing it, but at the time I hated it and it totally turned me off. You know, I didn't understand it, of course. The production was wacky is maybe the best thing I can say. And I really had no taste or liking for opera. Unlike Leonard, I grew up in a non-musical family at all. Not even really music appreciators. I'm Cuban, and the only family we listened to growing up was Cuban music. And people told me I was having a classical voice. I sang in choirs for many years. And, you know, I disliked that as any 13, 14-year-old would. And I was around 14. I wasn't working in the summers yet. It was one summer, and I was just home alone, and I was bored out of my mind. I was so bored. Literally, I watched an opera online. And this dates me. I watched Traviata online, and that's how I fell in love with opera. I thought I had to do this in whatever capacity, you know, administration, singing, you know, whatever it was. I thought it was so powerful, even sitting in my bedroom, you know, watching it on YouTube.
Wow, that is a very wonderful way to come to it. And I thank you all for those answers. I want to thank all three of you for this incredible discussion this evening. I want to thank Sean Curran, Leonard Slatkin, Elena Villolone. I want to thank our singers, our pianists, and all of you for joining us. I want to thank my colleague on Lay Opera Theater's Director of Marketing and PR, who is also our digital stage manager mastermind behind the scenes tonight. And a very special thank you to Leanne Alvarado, Opera Theater's Clayco Future Leader Fellow in the Administration Department, who has curated our series of spotlight presentations this year. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us for this first installment of the Carol L. Kimball Spotlight series featuring tonight Gianni Schicchi. We look forward to seeing you at OTSL's production of Schicchi starting in just a few weeks. We hope you have a great evening, and we hope that you are as excited as we are to be returning to live music after such a long absence. I hope you'll join us next Monday for our spotlight on Highway 1 USA. That's Monday, May 17th at 5:30 Central Time. We look forward to seeing you then digitally and in person at the opera very soon. Thank you so much. Stay well and good night.